Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Her website, taxpayer.com. Welcome back to the show, Kris.
Thank you.
Kris, the city of Vancouver is proposing a monstrous property tax hike. I think it's 8.8 or 8.9% for homes, and I'm sure business owners will be slapped with even a bigger tax bill. What's going on in Vancouver that they feel that they have to obviously go way above what people have gained in wages or price increases in their business?
Well, it is monstrous. You really used the right word there. We're getting phone calls and emails from people who are simple homeowners. They're simple business owners in the city of Vancouver, and it's getting to the point where they just can't afford it, period. They can't. And then we have City Hall, which is so out of touch that they will hire paper pushers hand over fist. They will expand their mandate to big global issue problems. They will do all that sort of stuff. Meanwhile, they don't do the basics, like manage to deal with a TransLink strike. They don't do the basics like making sure that their traffic flow is working through their downtown so that their businesses are actually able to make a profit so people can get downtown on time to work and get downtown on time to go shopping. And then they'll pull this stunt. They will turn around and say, by the way, taxpayer, give us more. Well, you can't get blood from a stone. These folks don't have any more money to spend. The politicians and the ever-fattening bureaucrats that work at Vancouver City Hall need to realize this. City politicians and city governance, for a long time, and it served us well, was dealt with more on a service basis. So what that means is city councilors, for example, were usually either folks who were educated and had otherwise a pension that had time on their hands, people like retired teachers or retired professors or semi-retired folks, and then small business owners who were invested in the community, who knew their streets, who knew their neighborhoods, who realized where the potholes needed to be filled, who knew what the kind of garbage collection that needed to happen, civil issues, civic issues, city-based issues. Those folks were the ones who used to serve as city councilors, and they'd have maybe one or two staff. Now, these cities are trying to turn themselves into city-states, into their own level of governance that eclipses sometimes the mandate of even provincial governments. But they're trying to do so while being bankrolled and funded by a tax base that hasn't changed. It's still property taxpayers and business taxpayers who are funding this. And so these folks who seem to have their degrees all in governance and political science and sociology and social justice need to realize where the money comes from. And they don't. And so this is where the disconnect is happening. We need real people, business owners, folks who've actually been out there making their own money in other professions throughout most of their life. We need those sorts of folks at City Hall. We don't need career academics and career politicians running it into the ground and really, really putting a hardship on taxpayers because they just can't afford it.
Well, I'm also wondering why Vancouver feels this sudden need. Didn't they look after their budgets in the past? Obviously not.
Exactly. Why is it that some of their neighboring cities aren't in these supposed dire straits? And it's who knows what's actually causing this deep down at the root. But as far as we can see with the actual staffing levels into management at Vancouver City Hall, that's a major problem. So you'll have city councils like Victoria, like Vancouver, doing things like declaring a climate emergency. And while that sounds, I don't know, activist or important on the surface, what that means deep down is that it gives these politicians and bureaucrats then this sort of overarching umbrella mandate to then do all sorts of crazy stuff, like jacking up taxes in the name of environmental protection, or suing oil and gas companies or natural resource companies, or blocking pipelines, for example. They need to make the connection that it's those very natural resources, things like pipelines and things like mining, all that sort of stuff, that pay their salaries, that enable them to have infrastructure in the modern world. And they also pay huge numbers of tax dollars. So, for example, the Trans Mountain Company, back before taxpayers stupidly bought it for no good reason, when they owned all of that infrastructure that runs through Burnaby, the amount of property tax alone, so not, any sort of rake-off coming from the sale of the oil or the transport of it, just the physical property. The physical property taxes from those properties paid for the garbage and recycling collection for the city. Like, it is just an astronomical amount of money. So what happens is if you have activist politicians who don't have any connection to reality, constantly trying to kill the golden goose, it's going to wind up dead, and you won't get any more eggs out of it. And unfortunately, I think we're reaching that point now at the city of Vancouver. There's no more connection and an understanding as to where this money comes from, and they think that they can just continuously come back to the same well of property owners, and that they can't. These folks will eventually get fed up, they won't be able to pay for it, and they'll sell and they'll move. Then what are they going to do?
What's Vancouver doing with the $40 million they raised from the empty home tax?
Exactly. Are we seeing, massive construction of affordable homes for people? Sold to the best bidder? No. We're just seeing stagnation. We're seeing tiny little things being done, like a hotel finally being taken over in the downtown east side that's basically falling down. Now it's going to be the city's liability, the Balmoral. But we're not seeing the actual action that people need to, number one, being able to afford good rental homes, and number two, keep business going. If you're picking favorites, for example, at the provincial level, as to which unions get their construction contracts, things like bridge replacements or tunnel work, things like that, and you're doing all that, it's going to trickle down to the municipal level, and you're going to see stuff like this. You're going to see them blindly jacking up taxes on working people and property tax payers, and constantly spending more money out the other door on activism with very little results. I don't know about you, but I don't hear from people in Vancouver who suddenly say, wow, there's a lot more rental market now. Things are looking great. Thank you so much. This is finally working. So Seattle doesn't have this sort of problem with the rental market. They've got a relatively good rental market, and it's an almost identical city, both geographically, climate, and actually politically in some cases as well. So what is Vancouver's problem?
Well, Vancouver's always had a shortage of rental. And when I first moved here, the vacancy rate was minus 1%
yes.
or something. Like, how can you have a minus vacancy rate? So the city hasn't done a lot to encourage rental construction. And also, Vancouver might make the mistake New York City did, where they keep removing industrial land and turning it into condos, while condos don't pay the same taxes. And New York went bankrupt because of that.
Yes, exactly. And they also might wind up fiddling with things like, massive amounts of rent caps and rent controls, and then that creates its own problems. While it can save a renter money in the short term, and as somebody who pays rent, I get that, I understand, but when you have big government, capital B, capital G, meddling in things like that, you'll wind up with consequences that you didn't anticipate. So, for example, apparently, and I don't know if this is still the case in New York City, but we were taught in an economics class, a lot of folks, when they were looking for a place to rent, would scan the obituaries. They'd see who died and where they lived, and then track down their rental cap. And so it wound up being called, a door fee or a key fee, things like that. And they would get the landlord to basically sell them the rights to the key. and then they'd be able to get in underneath that same rental cap. You'll wind up with weird situations like that. What they need to do is stop taxing and regulating all of our businesses to death, especially things like the construction industry, and remove a lot of the taxes that they need to pay for the initial build so that it's worth it to them. So that every single time they try to build a new unit for homes or rentals or anything like that, there isn't a massive and ever-increasing price tag attached to it. Like, for example, we've got the so-called school tax on homes that are worth more than $4 million. And while on the surface that sounds like awesome, your home is worth $4 million, a lot of those folks in West Vancouver and North Vancouver and in those areas have been in their homes since the early 80s. And so they bought them or built them back when it was relatively, comparatively affordable. And now the amount of taxes that they're suddenly needing to pay is going to eventually force them out of their homes. And it's just fundamentally unfair. Where does the tax money go? Just general revenue to the provincial government. It doesn't go back to schools at all. They just called it that in the budget so that people wouldn't complain. And then we also see things like the employer health tax, which was imposed by Victoria on job creators. What a lot of people don't realize is that it isn't just the businesses that are getting screwed there with the employer health tax, it's municipalities. So municipalities, when they have, a salary rate of more than $500,000, and almost all of them do, bingo! They have a whole new level of taxation that they now need to pay as employers. Guess who pays that? Property taxpayers and business taxpayers. So again, this whole thing just needs to cycle down. We need smaller government, less regulation, less taxation. Because the moment you start increasing the size of government, they have to feed off something. And this is exactly what we're seeing happening.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Aven Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Aven's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avenresources.com.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, the Trudeau government, bigger cabinet than ever for a minority government, and they've put in extra ministries that didn't exist before, including the Minister of the Middle Class. If the government was doing its job, should we have to have a minister to look after the middle class?
No. And my federal colleague, Aaron Woodruck, just said, what's next? The Minister of the Canadian Food Guide? Are we going to have a new minister named for every touchy-feely, amorphous sort of idea now, or intention? This is again getting back to the issue of ever-expanding big government. And for, most of your folks, I'm sure, have either worked in government or they've worked in industry, so they get it. They, of course, know that the moment you create a new ministry, you create all of the stuff that goes along with that. You create the political staff that now needs to be hired for that minister, which can be big or small. It depends on what your priorities are. Then you create the corresponding and permanent forever ever bureaucrats. It's the department that is then created alongside of the political ministry. So a lot of folks may not realize this, but there'll be the person who's the minister of, middle class welfare or whatever they want to call it. But behind that person is a deputy minister who is often paid the same or more, and he or she has a job for life, basically. They're a permanent fixture now of bigger and bigger government, and they never, ever, ever need to face a voter. They're never elected. And then below him or her is this massive amount of a department. So you have research staff, communication staff, administration staff. There's a special one just for stakeholders, they call it. Jim, who's going to be the stakeholder for middle class? Are they just going to fly people in from their minivans and suburbs? When she couldn't even define what the middle class was. And she said, having your child enrolled in hockey, it just makes you pull your hair out. So we're going to wind up going down this road and spending more and more. And so this is very troubling. Everybody, from any political party that they vote for, should be very concerned when they see government ballooning in this ridiculous way.
Well, Britain has the Minister of Happiness.
Yes, in order to fight off loneliness. And is it important to deal with loneliness and isolation? Absolutely. Can you manage that within, say, the health administration? Yeah, you absolutely can. You don't need to create an entire new department and an entirely new title. This is where it starts getting ridiculous. And one of the reasons for this is branding. So if they can say next time around, we care so much about the middle class, we created a ministry about it, and people don't think about what that means, it'll just make them feel touchy-feely.
Well, the government hasn't defined what that is, so how can we know if the ministry is achieving its goals, or has it even set any goals?
And we never will. We don't know. And this is where it's actually in a way ironically perfect that they named it this. Because the middle class, economists and sociologists will all say, is almost impossible to define. Most people think they're a part of the middle class, no matter what income level they are. Even if they're making more than $300,000 personally per year, they think they're middle class. Even if they're only making $30,000 a year personally, they still think they're part of the middle class. That is a huge football field of goalpost differences there. But they'll all still say it. So if you've got that big amorphous blob of an idea and you create a ministry about it, it's really mind-boggling. So if they focus more on actual results, making sure that taxes were lower, that businesses are attracted to come here, that people can afford to go get their education, to keep achieving, to keep climbing that ladder, that would help people. But naming something, this touchy-feely idea, is just going to waste our money. And just wait. They'll have all sorts of things built into this. They'll have travel budgets. They'll have publicity budgets. They'll name a special day for the middle class and have to have a budget for that too. This is what happens when you allow government to run off with a bunch of sentiments rather than clear principles and goals.
Well, they wanted to send kids to camp. I
Right.
said, so how ironic in Vancouver there and across the Lower Mainland, they're dismantling all these homeless camps and then they want to send your kid to camp. I said, well, a lot of people are doing that already.
Yeah, no kidding. Isn't that sad? And there's folks, I personally know people, working people, they go to work every day, they work in trades, who are single, and they live in an RV. In the Lower Mainland, because they can't afford rent. Very hardworking, upstanding people, always going to work, but that's literally how they live. And so isn't this ironic? Isn't it sad? And in the middle of the election campaign, they were rightly pilloried because they came forward and said, you know what would be awesome for everybody, for low-income people, is to be handed, I think it was $2,000 a year, but only if you use it to go canoeing in a federal park, in a national park. Only if you use it to go skiing in Banff. Well, the average working class struggling person in Scarborough or Langley or Red Deer, they don't do that. They don't go in their big Lincoln Navigators with their fancy kayaks and their skis and snowboards to places like Banff. They go camping locally. That's what they do with their families. But imagine a politician walking through and dangling that carrot and saying, yeah, I know you're struggling to pay for groceries. I know that hydro is really expensive and you're actually worried about being warm enough this winter, but here's a special treat that you can go to a federal park. This is part of the out-of-touchedness of federal government and all levels of government. And again, we need to sound the alarm about our local government because they're there now. They're at that ridiculous level of big government where they're making the wrong decisions and expecting all of us to pay for it.
Well, I remember when Vancouver's City Council passed the motion banning atomic weapons on the moon.
Right? Because they have control over that.
Yeah, so, hey, that was a story I played the Star Trek theme to. I thought it was that.
That's a very good theme to play. You know, we have we're sending in a Freedom Information request soon, this week, to find out what, if any, amount of taxpayer dollars were spent on this. It might be private, and if it is, I guess that's fine. But they put up a gigantic crystal chandelier under a bridge in Vancouver that an artist designed that will spin counterclockwise and go up and down on this cable every day. Why? So the homeless people sleeping underneath the bridge can have a bit of, fanciness above them? They don't want that.
Yes, how nice.
Let them eat cake.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, are Victoria city councillors looking at giving themselves a pretty hefty wage hike?
Yes, they are. They're examining the idea of giving themselves an up to 50% wage hike. And this is what makes average taxpayers really start pulling their hair out. Again, city councils have way inflated their mandates. We had city halls and city councils for the basics. They were able to liaise with school board districts and deal with things like that, to keep potholes filled, to make sure that their local police forces, whether they were their own city police or a branch of the RCMP, were happy and properly maintained. They picked up the garbage and the recycling. They managed the waterways so that we have clean water. That was kind of it, and some basic park pruning, things like that. Now, we've got there's almost an entire class now of people who are graduating university, and they've got these degrees in hands on city management or social management, things like that, and they're going into city government, and they're expanding their mandates by doing things like suing oil and gas companies, demanding climate change reparation letters to the country of Venezuela. They actually did that. Wondering whether or not they should be paying for Remembrance Day services, taking down statues, all sorts of stuff that costs a lot of money in the actual act of doing it, and then a ton of staff time. So why, for example, did we have the mayor of Victoria fly to New York City to go watch one of her heroes, as she called her, Greta Thunberg, speak at the UN? Why? Why did the mayor of a city on Vancouver Island fly, burning about 90,000 liters of jet fuel return, to New York City on taxpayers' dime? Why? Why didn't she just watch it stream online? Because she was literally everywhere. Why didn't she wait for Greta Thunberg to come to Vancouver? And then Mayor Lisa Helps could have gotten on her BC Transit bus, taken it to the ferry, walked on the ferry, picked up transit on the other side, and went and watched her herself in downtown Vancouver. It would have cost the taxpayer about $60 instead of however many thousands of dollars we spent sending her there. This is the sort of issue that is going to really upset taxpayers. And I encourage taxpayers, fight back. Don't just get mad. Phone her. Phone your mayor. Phone your city councilor. If you're living in Victoria and you are a taxpayer, you should be completely livid about this. Phone them. Say, I am not paying for ridiculous amounts of salary increases. I am not paying for you to wander so far out of your mandate that you're literally flying to Manhattan.
In Surrey, BC's second largest city, the city council, the mayor, against extra firefighters, against extra police, against building extra recreational centers and ice rinks. And we know if kids are busy, they don't get into gangs. But no, his solution, build a canal.
This is one of the stranger things that has come up in the whole BC poly, the BC politics chatter in recent years. And I'm trying dearly to be nice about it and understand where on earth this idea has come from. Because we used to use, so for example, in Ottawa, there is the Rideau Canal. You can take it from the river all the way along, if you really want to, up the locks to Kingston. It served a purpose because it was built well over 100 years ago. It was used for shipping traffic, and that's why they have the lock system. That is why they have canals in old world Europe, because that is how they moved stuff around. If they were on the river and they had all their barges and their delivery boats and all that sort of stuff, they needed to be able to penetrate deeper into some cities. And that is why they built canals, because they were the highways. They were delivery systems. What on earth would this be used for in Surrey? We also need to keep in mind that in times of when the canals were built, the amount of money that was being paid to do that was much lower, comparatively speaking. And it was much lower for often pretty bad reasons. We had folks that were working for next to nothing, in some cases slave wages, and in some cases with very little health and safety protection. That's why, because it was like generations ago. It was more than 100 years ago. It was
and the canal
world.
Users paid tolls.
Exactly. And so now, where is this money going to come from? Are they going to go hat in hand to the businesses that would be affected and say, could you put money into paying for the canal? Or will every single Joe and Sally taxpayer who owns property and businesses in Surrey have to pay this? Will they apply to the province to get some sort of a grant? Again, boom, there's provincial taxpayers, all of us are. Will they apply to the feds to get some sort of grant to build this for some reason? Again, boom, that's federal taxpayers, of which we all are. So this is a super big head scratcher, and the mayor has got to give a very good reason for this. Then they should hold a vote. He didn't run on the idea of building a canal through Surrey. And if it's a great idea and businesses love it and taxpayers love it and they all vote for it and they use it and make money off of it, like, fill your boots. That sounds fine. But going off on this kind of strange legacy project, big idea without understanding where it'll be paid for is really not a good idea.
Well, I mean, I've already heard the jokes. Yeah, Surrey wants a canal so they have a place to dump stolen shopping carts and handguns that have been used for crimes.
Isn't that sad? Isn't that sad? He was elected largely, we would say, because he likes things like SkyTrain, which is, while expensive, and we have our serious issues with TransLink, something the voters voted for. And it's a major part of infrastructure, and it's transit, and everybody would use it, we think. And he was also voted in largely because he said that Surrey needs its own police force because of the amount of crime and how people feel unsafe there in some regions of that awesome city. I go to Surrey all the time. Those were the two major issues of that election. It wasn't, let's build a canal. And again, if they can make the argument, and they can have it paid for where it isn't coming out of taxpayers' dollars, and it makes money for the businesses there and attracts tourism, okay. But you've got to make a darn good argument for it while you're in the middle of wondering if you can afford your new police force and canceling things like closer to home ice rinks.
Well, also, too, Surrey, it's a city where they have not caught up. About 1,000 people a month move to Surrey, so
yep.
And they have more than 72,000 school children, which is more than the population of the neighboring city of New Westminster, by the way. But so there are kids in Surrey who will go through their entire school career, K to 12, in portables.
Yep.
Again, the city could be looking at building more schools, but they don't.
Yes, or looking at using already existing buildings and fixing them up so that they're up to current code. I've lost count of how many times I've driven around Surrey, and again, I love the city. I use it quite frequently. Driven around the city, and you see what would probably have been at one point publicly owned buildings, or a corporation now owns it, but it's sitting vacant. It's behind fencing. And there's still lots of land there. They could be doing stuff like that in an economical way. But they're talking now, all this oxygen is being taken up talking about a canal. And again, if the mayor really wants it, he better get a good solid mandate from his voters who also say they want it, because that's fair.
There is a canal that flows by Surrey. It's called the Fraser River.
Yes, exactly. And it's funny you mentioned that, right? Because places like Surrey and New Westminster, all these places, they made their livelihood, and still do in many ways, from the Fraser River, because that is how British Columbia was founded, by folks who were going up the Fraser River and going up along the old Yale Road and going into the interior, and they were doing things like gold prospecting and home building and fur trading and all that other great stuff. And so, yeah, there's a great big canal, and it's called the Fraser. But do we economically need an outlet from the Fraser rolling through as a canal into deeper parts of Surrey? Will it be used for a functioning reason?
I mean, Surrey could build a development like the New Westminster Quay.
Right.
Which is functional, livable, practical, and it draws not just local traffic, but tourists.
Yep.
That would be, to me, a much more economically sound idea where private enterprise could pay for it than a water-filled ditch to nowhere.
Exactly. And then also keep in mind what kind of streets you would have to bisect. Like, I don't know about you, but traffic is, usually pretty busy in Surrey. Which streets are going to voluntarily say, "Oh yeah, no problem. You don't need to be able to have flow through here for traffic anymore." So it's going to become a big planning headache, along with a taxpayer headache. There's all sorts of wonderful things you can do to a waterfront area, like you just gave for an example. This doesn't sound like a practical one of them.
Yes, the gondolas of Surrey.
Could you just picture it? Oh no, it's going to be designated a World Heritage Site, founded, year 2022. Yay.
Yeah. Of course, a lot of people would say if Surrey was sinking, it would be a good thing.
No.
Again, that's not me. I've heard the jokes, all because of this canal thing, and
right.
And if he wants to connect it to Venice is a beautiful city, and it's in big trouble.
Yes, it's same. It happened back, I think it was in the 1920s, where it flooded as well. So it's one of those things where you really want to be introducing a lot more water at ground level there. And then we need to keep in mind that, like you pointed out, with how many school children are there and how many people are moving to the city of Surrey, they're moving there for a reason. They're moving there so they can be close to family, that they can be close to resources, and so that they can afford their homes. It's still crazy expensive to get any sort of housing, but Surrey is just that little bit more affordable. And if you can work and go to school in Surrey, and you don't need to cross the bridges, and you don't need to drive too much, you can make a good go of it. And then to turn around and tell those families who are busting their backsides to be able to make ends meet and pay for it, and who have moved to Surrey for affordability issues, by the way, your tax dollars are going to be going into a canal? You got to really get a good mandate for that.
Yeah, use that money for SkyTrain expansion.
Exactly, or schools, or infrastructure, or give it back to taxpayers so that their property taxes go down. Quit tinkering with your brand new city hall again and spending thousands of dollars on it again. Live within your means.
Kris, where can people get more information about some of the stuff we've talked about?
I really appreciate this chance, because this is one of the key mandates of the Taxpayers Federation and of some ratepayer groups who are smaller and more local. If this sort of stuff concerns you, you as a listener should take action. And it really, really matters. No matter who you vote for, this isn't an ideological thing. This is a direct democracy thing. If these issues concern you, go to our website, taxpayer.com, click on resources, and right there you can find tips on how to write a solid email, how to make a good phone call, and how to have some activism for true change in your local community. And it matters. It really matters, because when push comes to shove, politicians, even if, they're well-intentioned or not, care about their jobs. And if they think that their voters won't elect them again to their jobs, they'll take notice. So you call them and you say, if you do this or don't do this, I'm going to campaign against you. I will tell all my neighbors. I will tell all my colleagues at work. I will door knock against you. Get her done. And then if you can, go to a city council meeting and sit there and talk to them and ask questions. That matters. So go to our website, taxpayer.com, click on resources, and it's basically a toolkit of how you can make this change.
Kris, thank you for chatting with us.
Thank you so much for caring about BC.
My guest has been Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. If you have any questions for Kris, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. You can find us also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.